Count to five.
Hi, everybody. This is IB here at PPR Esports. We are bringing out a new segment here for PPR. This is going to be called Apex News, brought to you by PPR Esports. I will be joined by Besteon. This is going to be basically just a short news briefing over what's going on in the sport of F1 and, you know, get a couple different point of views here and pieces of perspective for all of you guys here. Best, welcome. How are you doing
Yo,
tonight?
yo. Uh, I'm good, man. It's Thursday. It's like 90 freaking degrees out where I am. Um, I'm hungry, but I'm ready to talk some motorsport, man. I've been looking forward to this all week. What you got for me today? We got lots of topics,
Absolutely,
huh?
man. Oh, absolutely. I've got some great, fantastic news here and some good topics. I think first off, though, let's start off just with a little bit of background here and where we come from with motorsports. Let our listeners get to know us a little bit better. Um, Go ahead and take the lead on this. Go ahead, Best.
Yeah. Well, I'm pretty unique, and I think I'm probably public enemy number one to a lot of Formula One fans. I started only watching in 2019. Like that's kind of the weird thing about this. I saw Drive to Survive. I was blown away with how cool the sport was. It itched to scratch. I didn't even know I had. And fast forward a year later, I've been to a Grand Prix. I've you know I've partied with the Tifosi in Monza. It's such a whirlwind how this addiction or obsession could take me just from watching a couple episodes of a Netflix show to then planning my entire 4-year anniversary around it. Uh, but how about you, man? I mean, I know we both come from different walks.
Absolutely. I mean, I've grown up with Formula One all my life. For the few people in the group that have seen my office that's inside of PPR, they know that my entire wall is covered with old F1 cars and old Michael Schumacher hats. I'm definitely part of the Tifosi. Um, Thank you, Michael, for all the great races and championships that you won for us. But yeah, I've been watching, I would say, probably. I started seeing F1 on the TV growing up, probably 99. And then I really became a hardcore fan uh, when they came back to Indianapolis and watched, religiously since then. And there's been a few seasons that I've missed regrettably, but I've been to a couple of races now. I've been down to Circuit of the Americas twice in Austin, Texas. Saw Kimmy's last win, which was absolutely amazing. I'm a huge Kimmy fan, and
That was the famous fucking finally on the team radio.
it was definitely worth it, right? I mean, the way that it didn't matter if you were a Mercedes fan, a Red Bull fan, a Williams fan, it didn't matter who you were there for. Every person in the entire circuit was happy for Kimmy, and that's what's really amazing about the sport is we have so much diversity, but when it's somebody who's so influential and somebody that everybody cares about, even to the slightest extent, we all rally together. Um, but that is basically my background. I am in love with the sport. I'm in love with the technical innovations, and it's really amazing to me how much of it has been brought to the streets. Right?
Just look at
ABS,
Toyota.
launch control. The Toyota,
The
the
Toyota.
Honda.
I was gonna
Right?
say the Toyota Prius directly descended from Formula One tech.
I mean, and that's crazy, right? So it's really amazing that we have this beautiful sport with all this technology in it. I'm gonna go ahead though and move on from this.
Oh,
I think that's enough talking about ourselves.
I
Go
was
ahead.
gonna say though, I that's where I differ from you, my friend. I love the sport for kind of the clash of personalities that it gives, like the political backdoor dealings. You know all the stereotypical things they say, the cliches about the world of F1 and the world of motorsport, and how all these different players ultimately determine the future of teams just in closed door meetings. And that I love that kind of shit. House of Cards was one of my favorite shows on Netflix before Kevin Spacey did the thing with the guy, and then it got weird. But Before that, it was still a good show, and when I saw all these great episodes like Horner and Beatable being like totally just petty, and Horner's like, "Oh look, you spent all your money on your driver," and he's like, "Well, at least we got one," and it's like, "Oh shit!" Like, like that really, that's a
And I mean,
real, that was a real interaction. That was genuine interaction.
you're absolutely right, and it makes sense that you would appreciate that so much more with your background in business and everything. Um, and it really is a whole bunch of backroom handshake deals that turn into paperwork eventually. And that's the beauty of the sport is there's always something, right? Like here we are several weeks into a pandemic, we haven't seen racing at all in 2020 from our drivers other than through esports. And we're still there's still news, there's still drama, there's still information for us to talk about, and that's something that's really amazing about Formula One versus IndyCar. IndyCar is a lot more concise and it's paperwork, and this is the deal. But
How very Roger
with
Penske.
that, exactly. If you're not racing for Roger Penske, are you even racing? So, with that said, though, you know, I'm going to bring up the big question. What's going on with Mercedes? Are they staying? Are they leaving? Are they selling?
Mm.
What's happening?
So I've thought long and hard about this myself, and the tricky thing is Mercedes isn't the AMG team is broken up into two halves. Whether we like to admit it or not, there's the team. There's what team? What it's a Brixley or Brackley, and
Hmm.
there's their engine. There's like they have their AMG division, and they also have their engine division. And while the engine division does work with their main team, their engine division also produces engines for Williams, McLaren, and gonna be Aston Martin.
Hmm.
So it's so weird to think like would they walk away from what is technically a profitable venture? They've won what 6 years on the trot since 2014, pretty much, and
Exactly.
they showed no signs of slowing down even going into this year. Everyone kind of shit their pants when they saw Das. I didn't even notice it until everyone on Twitter was like, "Hey, look at this, the wheel moved," and I was like, "No, it fucking didn't." And then I looked at it again, and I was like, "Holy shit, the wheel fucking moved," and and it tripped me out. But they have those two entities that need each other to exist, and we kind of have to face facts right now. We're going through the worst economic depression ever. Like England came out the other day and said like this is worse than it was pre-revolution, back when they got their asses handed to them by like the French. So think about that. Like we are really entering into uncharted territory, and I don't think Domlear's got it in them to want to keep funding it.
And I mean, I understand your perspective 100%. I just also don't think that they want to lose the youth of the brand that they're building. I mean, if we're really honest, you being a businessman, being 100% clear, you would understand that Formula One is ultimately it's a dinosaur in this age. It's becoming prehistoric, and it's just so expensive
It is
to
such a
maintain.
gilded age sport. That's to quote another Formula One podcast that I listen to. I won't steal that reference, but they are absolutely right. And this writer named Rob Zachney said it well. It this sport should not exist. It should not be profitable. There's no reason we need to be flying around circuits at 220 miles an hour to push forward like the event horizon of hybrid technology. Like these engines are the most efficient they've ever been. Like that is that tech really going to change in a few years? Probably not, but hey man, fast car go vroom. Like let's keep it up.
Uh, and I mean, you're right. There's so many events that it's even hard for. I know when Bernie was running the show before Liberty Media took over, he would constantly fight with different tracks because they wanted to make more money. But Bernie's like, but we need to make money too to be able to support these teams, especially, before the budget caps or anything like that even were as big as they are now. About being a topic on the thing, Ferrari just demands so much money. Mercedes now demands so
Oh,
much
we'll
money.
we'll
Same
get
with
to
Red
Ferrari later. We'll get to Ferrari later, but
Bull. Absolutely. So my perspective is though, back to the topic for Mercedes, you know, I could understand them wanting to leave the sport. I could see it. They've came in, they've dominated, they've accomplished, and if this season gets off the ground, they're going to, match Michael and Ferrari.
Which I think
But
I kind of secretly want them to just get it over with, because that means that someone else can start to make a play for the throne. Because it seems to me that that's the only thing really incentivizing any further development of that program is we have to beat Ferrari. We have to
yeah,
be the ones to have the best ever. Like, that's us. Lewis did it with us.
so here's my question, and this was something that I would think about then. You know, the FIA and Formula One came out and said that they're not changing the car regulation like they were next year. It's going to be the same cars again. So we're going to have 3 years of this generation of F1 car with the different front wing. Why would Mercedes jump out now and jump ship? I mean, if they've already got the formula perfected, then go ahead and beat the record. Not just take 7, go take 8. Put the final, stone in the ground and lay the path to success. Make the road. I mean, if they were changing the regulations next year still, I could understand. But I really don't think that it's something that they want to back out on if they know that they're this successful.
Well, I can tell you from having taken a couple of finance classes, and I don't claim to be some kind of Merrill Lynch investment banker genius. I still don't really understand what happened in The Big Short. I kind of know,
Mhm.
so like that's kind of where I'm coming from. But there's a bottom line in business. Just looking at it from Dom Lear's perspective,
Yeah.
does the project make you money? Yes or no. If it makes you money, you do the project. Like, that's it. You don't even ask questions. If you run a company and this project will net you a profit, you do it. So does this net Mercedes a profit in a post-coronavirus economy, though? That's the big question I have. I don't have the expertise to really dig into the numbers and figure that out. But it's something that I come back to. Like, why would they leave? But then why would they also stay when there's much bigger issues afoot? I hate to take away from the fun of motorsport. And like, this is a nice escape for us right now. But at the same time, it's like, shit. We kind of have to acknowledge those underlying problems that are going to rear their head in 6 or 7 months.
Yeah, you're 100% right. And I mean, the other thing that you have to think about is, you know, a lot of these other manufacturers have other companies, or they are, smaller companies to begin with. For example, Renault is very popular in France, and they move a lot of vehicles, so they probably make quite a bit of money. Mercedes is more of a high-end luxury brand. Yeah, people are spending more money on their vehicles, but are these people going to want to continue to spend that money in a post-coronavirus, you know,
Well,
economy, like you were saying?
yeah.
So, unlike, Ferrari, they, even though they're a separate business for um, the Scuderia, because it's a racing team, ultimately it still gets a lot of its funding not just from the sport, but from the Fiat Chrysler Auto Group that they're a part of.
Yeah,
So
exactly. That's a
Mercedes just doesn't have that. So I definitely see your point of view. But that moves us on to our next topic there. What happens to Toto?
so I gotta be honest. There's kind of a rule of thumb in if you're a guy like Toto, you've been walking to the beat of your own drum your entire life. Are you familiar with his upbringing, or have you listened to him on Beyond the Grid or anything?
I've seen a lot of how he worked his way up to get to where he is. He wasn't very, didn't have like money to get into it and didn't have a lot of experience. He kind of forced his way and proved himself.
So I want to say this then. I've listened to a lot of his early life's talk. Like, what was he doing before he had even thought of car racing? Because he the truth is, he was a guy who was just like, he found out about lower formulas when he was like in his teens, early 20s, kind of the same way maybe someone like me would. Like, oh my god, this is kind of cool. I wish I'd known about this when I was 6. I could have bought a go-kart. But he lost his father at a young age. So he really had to look out for his family, look out for himself. And when you're kind of put in those situations, you start to develop a survival instinct. So you really just start to think, what's the best thing for me at the end of the day and my family? For him, that was getting into this Mercedes program, and he one day because they asked him to come in and look after this. He knew this was the right plate. They had the money backed there. They had the right people in the room. It checked all the boxes for him.
Mm-hmm.
So there's this now new rumor kind of circulating, like, would he go to work for a guy like Lawrence Stroll? Now, I don't know Lawrence Stroll personally. I don't know many billionaires personally. If I did, I probably wouldn't be recording this podcast right now. No disrespect. But there is an element, an interpersonal element, and something intangible you really got to think about. When you go to work for a guy like that, a guy who relatively controls everything in his life, he likes to be hands-on. And he's already got good people there. Like Otmar Zafnauer is a very, very good team principal. Andrew Green, obviously, he proved a lot of people wrong in that the tracing point is like a genius move. Like looking back at that, we're going to be like, wow, that was actually pretty smart of him. If you're a small team, that's how you got to play the game. They've already got good people there. But if you're Toto and you've already been this independent guy your entire life and you've always been trying to like move yourself up, does that almost kind of put you at a disadvantage to have to be the whipping boy for a guy like Lawrence Stroll who's going to demand perfection? You know?
I mean, I don't. Toto is a very strong personality,
Totally.
and he knows exactly what he wants. And I don't think. I think yes, obviously he would be a whipping boy, because Lawrence is going to come to him and he's going to say, "Why aren't we performing?" Because in all honesty, I don't think that Toto is a great team principal, but how much of actual engineering can he offer that is making that Mercedes so successful to a team like
And it's
racing?
not like Force India has a culture that needs fixing. They've always been a really put together team, right? Like
Yeah,
you know better than I do, but my understanding is they've always been the ones who punch above their weight year after year,
yeah.
hand over fist. They've always been the ones. Like, that's how Sergio gets all of his podiums. He's always the one knocking at the door when one of the top three teams like shits the bed.
But what's going to push him to be that top three team? Do you think Toto is the key to that?
I think maybe, maybe not. I will say this: the Aston Martin name's going to give them a lot more. I don't want to say legitimacy, but it makes them more of a brand in this sport. And if you look at the strongest teams in the sport, they have really strong brands associated with them. Because whether you like to, I mean, you obviously know this. You're a Ferrari fan. That brand itself is worth so much because of the history. McLaren's worth a lot because of its history. Shit, Mercedes is a car brand. Like those are brands people recognize. And Aston Martin is a global brand, and that gives you a lot of latitude to bring in more investors. People are going to want, like, obviously this is talking about in a perfect world where the economy's not shit, but think about all those. But think about all the new money out there. People in China, people in the Middle East. Now, I'm not talking about the UK and the United States. I'm talking about the new money that's coming in right now from all these big fucking countries in the East. They want to be a part of this. They want to take part in these exciting traditions that their countries weren't able to years ago because the countries didn't exist really. They didn't have any lateral movement for them. Like China finally caught up to the rest of the world, sort of. Saudi Arabia is like trying to secularize themselves. They want to be a part of this. I think they're going to throw money at Aston Martin, and I think Toto Wolff is the perfect guy to bridge that gap. Now, would he leave the cushy gig he's got at a team that wins all the time? That's a tough question. It's a tough question. I do think he would, though.
Yeah.
I do think he would be the one to bridge that gap.
Not to pull Lewis into this and to bring a whole nother topic in, but where does their relationship lie? Are we looking at either a Lewis retirement or a Lewis move at that point? Because Lewis has always had Toto, and Toto has always had Lewis, and since moving to Mercedes, at least, I'm not talking about the McLaren years, but that relationship, that duo, it's so strong and so successful. You know, is that something that we see separating long term, or do we see maybe even Lewis retire?
Well, think about Lewis. Everywhere he's been, he's had someone in his corner. He had Ron Dennis at McLaren when that Fernando Alonso meltdown was happening. He had Toto when he came into Mercedes. But do you know who I think is the key figure here that maybe we're not thinking about?
Hmm.
Niki Lauda. If he was still alive, I think Lewis doesn't leave. Because I think if Niki were alive, Niki would look at least Or maybe he would leave. I think Nikki would probably tell him, "Go where you're going to win. Don't think about me. Think about yourself."
And I think that's an excellent point right there. Nikki did have a very big part in the whole reason that Lewis even moved to Mercedes. Lewis has said in an interview that if it wasn't for Nikki Lauda calling him personally and saying, "Hey, you know, this is this is something that you should do. This is where you're going to be successful." I don't think Lewis would have moved for McLaren. I think he would have looked elsewhere for other than going to Mercedes because Mercedes was struggling before Lewis got there.
That's you'd know better than me, but my understanding was they were a midfield team at best when the program first turned converted from Braun to Mercedes Benz.
Yeah, I mean, we had Michael and Nico Rosberg there, and obviously Nico stuck it through, and Michael just couldn't put the car together, if I'm honest. And it was the strangest thing for me to watch because, you see the great Michael Schumacher struggling to make pace in a car that was literally just leading the pack with all of the funding from Mercedes behind it. And it's crazy to think that he would struggled so much. Nico was the main component that stuck around there as far as the drivers, and he was, you know, taking the seven-time world champion for a walk around the park and showing him how it's done. So I I don't know. I think that as far as Toto goes, if Toto leaves, I think that's the nail in the coffin for Lewis, and Lewis is either going to look elsewhere or he's going to consider retiring.
And that I think that segues us beautifully into the next thing on the run sheet here. Sebastian Vettel, who's kind of been the talk of the town recently. Um, what IB? I'll just let you run with this one. You know Ferrari better than I do. What would they have done in the past?
You know, they stuck around with Massa for a long time. They stuck around with Rubens for a long time.
But
I
did they
think Vettel,
did they have a
if
Charles like waiting in the wings though the way they do now?
so, I'll be no. Charles is the youngest person that they've ever had drive for them in the last 20 years. You know, um, they never ever would just take on a second year driver straight on. I mean, even Michael had a few years at Benetton before they pulled him
And a
over.
couple
Uh,
championships.
exactly.
Yeah.
You can't argue with the championships before Scuderia money comes knocking at the door saying, "Hey, here." I mean, I think I think Vettel should have been gone a long time ago. And if I think we were still under,
Oh, okay. Wait.
yeah,
Finish your thought. Finish your thought.
I think if we were still under the Jean Todt, um, you know, hierarchy or team principal at Ferrari, I don't think Vettel would have got a renew on his last contract.
When did they renew him? Was it 17 or 16?
I want to say it was 17 with a 2-year deal.
And 17 was when he was actually in the conversation before up until the Singapore incident, he was pretty much like that was going to be the year that he was going to get his fifth.
Yeah, at least that he believed, because it was both him and Hamilton fighting for their fifth at the same time, which was what could have been an amazing battle, but Vettel just he can't do well under pressure. And I've talked to you about this before in our race series in Division One and Xbox, um, about how Vettel struggles anytime that he's not leading. He can't charge through the field. Doesn't matter what car he has. Even back when he had the Red Bull, yeah, he can get up to a certain point, but once he starts getting to those cars that are closer to equal level with him, he doesn't have the pace, he doesn't have the finesse to carry the car through the corner quick enough to keep up with him. And I'm not bashing Vettel. I think Vettel is a very talented driver, but I don't think he has what it takes. And I think he's so frustrated with himself at this point that he can't perform the way that he knows that he has the ability to.
And I think another factor that I mean, I don't think people overlook this at all, but it is always important to note he won his titles in a different era. Technically speaking, that was before the regulation change when they went to turbo hybrids. And I've never driven either version, but there is a significant change going from a naturally aspirated V8 to a turbocharged V6. Like that, I think just the average person could agree on that, right?
I mean, there's no argument in it. If you look at telemetry back from when Senna was driving a turbocharged car, his throttle response was completely different than any other driver in how he, hopped on and off the gas really quickly, basically fluttering it in order to not allow the turbo to spool up too much. And I don't know what Vettel's driving technique is. I haven't seen any of his
Well, he
telemetry,
certainly likes to
but
overdo it on the gas pretty often, so you could probably argue there's something to do with throttle input.
I mean, how many times have we seen him go around in the last season?
Oh, it's
Uh,
well. I was at Monza when he went around, and I didn't. I was on the other. I was at Curva Grande, so I'm pretty far away from Ascari, but I could hear the Ferrari groans. And then 10 seconds later, we had the BBC radio on, and we just hear, "Oh, and Vettel's spun at Ascari. Oh no, he's lost it." And I'm like, "Oh shit, again?"
so it's funny though, because not only did he spin there, he spun over in the
Second chicane the year before, right?
yeah, and then the
Yeah.
stadium section at Coda last year at Circuit of the Americas. So I mean,
And that's
I
not
don't
really
know.
that's
Maybe
not that crazy of a corner, really.
no, it's right after the long straight. I believe it's turn
Well, it's
12.
a hairpin and
then
into a
going
double
into
left-hander before the long right.
yeah, it's the
Yeah.
double left-hander or the double right-hander there. That's where he spun.
Right. Oh yeah. 'Cause that's the. It's like you're
So,
taking that like in fifth or sixth gear before you hit the left hand before you switch back. Yeah.
like, there's no point to spin there other than the fact that you're pushing too hard, and he's just. I think we saw where his mentality is at Baku when he came up alongside
Yeah.
Hamilton. I mean,
He brake checked me.
I get that it's frustrating, but I don't know if you've ever driven an electric car. So
Never. No. Never.
I can only assume, based off of my experience, I've driven a Tesla, based off of my experience driving an electric car, if they're in full charge mode at low speed, I can only assume that when it's doing its regenerative braking on the car, that it's very similar to that.
It's a negative
Because
braking, right? Like it almost feels like there's a little rubbing on the pads.
it pulls on you.
Yeah.
And you're feeling this negative friction. And that's what it was like, in the Tesla I drove. You turn that on, you let off the gas. It's not like you're coasting in a normal car. The car is pulling on you and you can feel it. It's a very noticeable difference. And I can only assume they're under safety car. You know, I'm sure they have full charge on. They're not running any ERS. I can only assume that Hamilton just let off the gas for a second, and that's what happened.
But that's all it takes.
But his reaction to it, right? Like, that's what blows me away, and that's what makes me think,
Maybe he's
Vettel.
held on too hard, too close to the edge.
I don't think he's mature enough for Ferrari.
Okay, shit.
I'm just gonna call it out.
I'm not here to offer the counter argument to that because and what this is not the point of a podcast is to agree. But with all of this said, then there is the hot debate: who's going to come in? And there's three names that have been thrown out. I want you to start with one. What's the first name that comes to mind for you? Who you'd want to see take that seat?
Obviously, I'll leave that one till the end because that's going to be a long discussion.
Okay. Do you want to table this then? Move on to the next thing.
I think I would like to see Ricardo come in more than I would
Okay.
like to see the McLaren driver, who I'll let you bring up here in a second. But I think Ricardo, he's frustrated. He needs a good drive.
Did you hear what
He
Prost said
doesn't-
about him? Did you hear what
What did
he was quoted
No.
the other day? Yeah, he got quoted saying, basically he just Formula World had the quote perfectly teed up. Essentially, he said, "We have no future options with him." That's essentially what he said. Is Daniel wants to drive with us, but at the same time, we don't feel that that's going to be good for either of us. And it kind of came as a shock to me because Prost is kind of supposed to be he's supposed to be the Lauda in the garage over there, kind of acting as like the old guard, like, hey, like I was once in your position, like we can work this out, like here's how you be a champion, here's how you outsmart your opponents and stuff. And instead, he just literally just being the blunt guy he is. He's just like, I don't know, I don't think so. Like,
I'm gonna be honest. I don't like Prost in the first place, anyways. But I'm not gonna start that argument here, not tonight. But I genuinely think though that Ricardo would be a good fit over there. But at the same time, I feel like it's going to be a lot of more of the same of what he saw at Red Bull.
being relegated to a number two.
Exactly. And I feel like that's going to happen almost to any driver that's there, with the exception of one. But what do you think about the other drivers?
So, the two debates I've taken time to kind of dig into, and Charles was already quoted talking about one of them, and the other driver has come out and said that he's still under contract at McLaren. I can't speak on the topic, so surprise, shock, and alarm. But the first one I want to talk about, because he's kind of the one that it's not as obvious, I think, it's Pierre Gasly. And yeah, you might be like, oh, like, that's interesting. You might be saying to yourself, and here's why it is interesting. Charles and Pierre are buds. They both speak the same language. They grew up together, essentially, like right there in France, karting all the time. It really, and I know these guys are competitors. They're always going to look out for themselves. So I'm not going to sit here and pretend like Pierre would just be like happy being the Rubens to the new Schumacher, which is what they're putting behind Charles. But there is kind of like that. Ferrari needs to have that clear number two. That's how they've won titles, was having a number two, a guy who they will say, you're the bitch, let him through. And I don't think Pierre is going to turn down an opportunity to race with a teammate that he likes, race in a team that knows is going to look after him, not a team that's going to kick him to the fucking curb. And he's already living in Italy. On top of all that, he lives in northern Italy. He's an hour from Maranello.
You bring up a very interesting thing, though, because I haven't really been thinking about any of the younger drivers. And,
I'll tell you, I'll get.
and people
I was
like
going to say,
that.
I'll get to why Carlos wouldn't leave McLaren, but finish your thought. Sorry, I'll get to that.
So, I mean, you've got drivers like Kvyat and stuff like that are, just looking for a chance to be competitive. And they're not going to care if that means signing on as a number two. That's a very interesting thing there, though. I think Kvyat would be okay being a number two. I think
Ferrari wouldn't take him. I just think he's too much of a loose cannon for them. They just wouldn't want a guy wrecking the red car every weekend. Not to say that he would.
I think he was. I think he's mellowed down a lot. He had that same issue that Verstappen had, but the difference was Verstappen did it or took the risks and they were successful, whereas Kvyat took the risks and they weren't. But if you've just got to putt around and be able to pass cars and stay up there in the top four, top six, I don't think that they'd have a problem with Kvyat, because if Kvyat keeps a level head like he's had these last couple of years, he might be a good option.
That's not a bad argument. And he was their development driver in 2018, correct? That was like during his exile.
Yeah, he did a test drive, and that's what really made him want to be back in the sport was, his experience while he was there at Ferrari. So they already have a little bit of a relationship with him.
And which is then that leads me perfectly into why Carlos Sainz would not leave McLaren.
Yeah,
and it's pretty obvious. To some people, it's not, but I'm telling you why it's actually more obvious than it seems. Why would you walk away from a team, an organization that has completely devoted itself to you, not to Lando, not to anyone else? They're not thinking about bringing in young talent, to you, because they want to make you the next world champion in a McLaren car. I would not walk away from that. And you have like this great working relationship with Zach Brown. Andreas Seidel came out of the hopped over from WEC and immediately made a difference in their organization. They're switching back to Mercedes power, which has been proven to be the benchmark in this era. Why would you walk away from this perfect situation? The keys to the kingdom have been handed to you, and he drove that orange car through the fucking roof last year. You know, like I can't. Why would you walk away from that? You're not going to get that at Ferrari, especially if you're Carlos. He wants to be a champion. Not to say that Pierre or Daniel wouldn't, but if you look at a guy like Daniel, his window might have closed. Carlos's window is very wide open. He's only a year older than I am. I'm a little passionate about this because I really want to see Carlos win a title at McLaren. But
I mean,
does that
I'm
make
right there
sense?
with
It
I
makes
want to see
sense, right?
I want to see McLaren win a title too. I mean, I love McLaren, especially after Zach Brown took over and Ron Dennis has been out because I had a little bit of an issue with the old McLaren guard. Obviously, being a Ferrari fan.
That Mark Priestley book was very insightful. If I can give our listeners any recommendation, it's called The Mechanic. It's the greatest behind the scenes tell all of the pit lane, and it goes into the entire Spygate thing. It's so good. You should read it if you haven't, Nathan, but it blow your fucking mind.
Might find an audiobook on it. I'm not a really avid reader, if I'm honest.
Perfect. Get yourself some crayons and listen to the
Crowns. Jeez. Now, let me color in my Ferrari over here.
Yeah. It's the red one.
I need the red. Where's the red? I ran out of red. Mom. No. So, I can't argue with you. I mean, I think that Carlos does have a full team backing him. And I think if McLaren is not there within the next couple years, I think Lando's going to have the experience that
he'll jump ship.
He might beat Carlos at the team, though.
You think so?
And that's my concern. I mean, okay.
That's gonna be so sad. The meltdown of the greatest bromance in Formula One.
I mean, let's talk about it though. Okay? So you watch. We've all been watching esports. We've all seen Lando drive, and yeah, he was big into sim racing before, but week after week he gets better. And not only is he going into other sports to gain experience, but I don't want to know how many hours the guy puts in on the sim.
Allegedly, he's been doing iRacing since he was like 6 years old. Allegedly. I don't have any source to back that up, but that's the word on the street.
I mean, if that's not proof, though, that the guy only builds his technique and gets better with more time behind the wheel, I don't know what is. I'm sure if McLaren would let him just go out and run an entire practice section, on the track, he'd do it.
That's a good point.
I really, truly feel that in 2 years' time, Lando is going to be faster.
Under the new
Carlos.
regs, maybe? That would be the turning point for you?
I think so, in all honesty.
And we've never seen these guys race in ground effect either. Because we're going back to ground effect. We're ditching aerodynamics, essentially. We're ditching them entirely, but we're trying to get away from that. We're
going to a very IndyCar style setup, which is crazy. And, that brings in another point, though. McLaren's pretty loyal to Alonso, and they love him. And if
he would, no, don't. I know where you're going with this. It's not going to happen.
If they do good next season,
it's not going to happen
with the Mercedes engine.
It won't happen.
You can't tell me that next generation car is
It won't happen. It won't happen. Fernando just wants the Triple Crown. He can get that, and he can go away. That's it. And I'm not saying that as someone who dislikes Fernando. I wasn't around when Fernando made his claim to fame. I can't talk to that. I can only talk to what I saw the last 2 years. That's all he wants.
I'll be honest.
It's like when MJ went back to the Bullets. It almost ruined his entire, legacy.
Michael did it. It didn't tarnish his legacy.
Yeah, but it almost did. People are more nostalgic about that than you like to admit. They're like, oh no, with the '90s, the Bulls and all that stuff. And yeah, I'm watching The Last Dance. This is in my head, but that wasn't great. It wasn't great, and it's just, why would you go back? Just take it. You've got the 2 championships, and yeah, I'm sure he wants to have 3 so he can be like Senna, but Just take it. Like, just take the win. You're trying to win at Dakar. You're trying to win it. He's already won Le Mans twice. Like, get Indy. You got Monaco. You got Le Mans. You can be in the conversation as being one of the all-time greats without having to go back and bust your ass for a third title. And you're worth so much money already. There is no incentive to do that unless it really keeps him up at night that he doesn't have as many as Senna.
I think that he just wants to.
You think he just really wants it?
I think he's a Kimmy, but he wants to drive a quick car.
That doesn't work in F1. You don't get to be like the old guy hanging around. Oh, I want a competitive car too. I don't think it works that way.
He did it for like 5 years.
Yeah, but that's because Kimi had that. Which I guess maybe you're right. They did have that established relationship at Ferrari, but Kimi wasn't going in there like, I'm gonna do this so I can be a winner. Kimi was like, oh well, I'll do it if I want to. They're paying me, might as well. Like, it's a totally different attitude and approach. I think it's incomparable. That's apples and oranges, Nathan.
So I will say this: I don't think he's going back to Ferrari, and I don't think seeing that we're talking about the Ferrari seat, I don't think that we have any worries about Alonso jumping into the Scuderia again. But
it's almost like Ferrari didn't see what happened in 2007. when is Fernando Alonso going up against someone who's on the same skill level? It's just almost. It would not work. It would not work. It doesn't work that way.
So, the last person I'm going to bring up about Vettel's seat is going to be Lewis Hamilton. What do you think?
No. I think no. No.
Hard no?
Hard no. Hard no.
But
Lewis has raced for himself his entire life. He's not going to suddenly race at the behest of the Scuderia. That doesn't fit into his identity at all.
Oh, so I'm going to throw this up completely and make this completely different.
Go ahead.
I think the Scuderia would change their ways and be more lax on their rules and push Leclerc to second seat to have Lewis.
That would be controversial. It would be wrong, and it would be disrespectful. But honestly, with the way that engine deal went down, I don't put anything past these fucking guys. Lumi Camilleri is a Machiavellian modern day, because Binotto's not pulling the fucking strings. Because him and Todd are just on the phone all the time, aren't they?
Yeah.
They must have group calls every night. Like, all right, fellas, so how do we shred the documents? Where can we bury these?
Oh, I would be surprised if he's not.
What fuel flow sensor? We don't know what you guys are talking about.
Mode 6.
Yeah, and then Todd falling asleep during video conference meetings. Did you see the clip of him doing that when they were talking about the 2021 regs? He literally fell asleep in his office chair. Like he's only at the FIA to make sure Ferrari can keep getting their check.
Honest that's fair. That's fair. I think though that the big problem is now is. I don't know. I think that Ferrari would completely throw the book out because here's why. They do not have a championship since what, Kimi?
It's 13 years now. 13 years.
That's killing the team.
It's killing the whole company. How do you think they feel, man? I've been to Maranello. That entire town is built around. That's the town Michael Schumacher built.
Oh yeah.
I'm surprised I didn't see a cardboard cutout of him on every corner. But the entire
Did
country.
You ever see the old Shell commercial where you go in and it was like
I've seen that. Yeah, I've seen that. What was I gonna say? But no, it is probably killing them. But is Lewis going to fix your problem? Probably not. It's been their strategy. It's been their organizational behavior. It's been a lot of other factors. Charles has had to overcome those things on his own, on track.
Yeah.
Like the Singapore thing, I could not believe they had the audacity to, he's been the hot hand. And not to say that they basically converted a 1-2 into a 1-3.
Oh, let's go to Sachi.
Yeah, or that.
What was that? Help Vettel out and he'll let you by. Well, is that Vettel sitting here, being a stubborn, prancing horse, or is that, you know, Bonanno not putting his foot down and telling him, get the hell out of the way? He's
Bernardo,
faster,
yeah,
and
he
this was the agreement.
Bernardo just reminds me of like an NFL coach right before they get fired. It's
So
just
let's do
like the
this.
writing is already on the wall. He's got a very finite amount of time left in that position as team principal. I don't think they get rid of him entirely. He's their technical director. He's obviously an important part to the team. Like you don't just find people like that walking down the street. I acknowledge that. At the same time, it's very clear to me after 2019. Like it's what are you doing, bro? Like Harry Potter's sitting on the pit wall, stroking his fucking chin. Your driver's yelling at you on the radio, "Hey, I need to pit. I need to pit. Plan A, Charles, plan A," and like it's a mess. My girlfriend, as soon as she hears the engineer, she just looks at me with a sad expression. I'm like, yeah, here it comes. Here comes the bungle.
So what do you think? Should Ferrari put Gutensteiner as the
Gunther?
team?
No
Yeah.
way. I mean, he'd whip him into shape, but I think after that, I hate to say it, that Gunther kind of showed his colors during this last season of Drive to Survive, and it's pretty clear why they weren't solving any problems, because he's like, just fucking fix it. It's fucking embarrassing, and it's like, Jesus Christ, like I wouldn't want to fucking work there. Guy
I
like
mean, that's
that yelling at you every
how it
day.
works.
Ugh, well, we should table the Ferrari talk. We could do this for hours. Just there's such a controversial
Absolutely.
topic.
Absolutely. Let's go ahead and move on to
Want to do some
Ralph.
esports? Or you want to go to
Let,
Ralph?
let's go to Ralph, and we'll finish off with esports because I feel like that's a pretty big issue. Um, and you kind of touched on this earlier. You know, you brought up that one of the lower end teams like Racing Point is more of a consumer than a constructor, right?
100%.
You know, Tracing Point, if you would, it's a Mercedes. It's last year's Mercedes. We all know this. We've all seen this. And Ralph Schumacher gave some pretty wise words, in my opinion, to Williams. But I still disagree with it. So if you guys don't know what Ralph said, Ralph basically told, is quoted to say that Williams should follow a model that is much more like Haas. Which what he means by that is Haas doesn't make anything in house. They source everything from other teams and other companies, and they don't construct anything. They just assemble and design.
It's a very, very expensive kit car.
Yeah, I mean, that's what it is. You go out, you can let me go buy a Pontiac Fiero and build a Countach out of it, right?
Yeah.
That's what it is. That is exactly what it is.
We're going to use bungee cords to make scissor doors. Let's do this, guys.
It's funny. There is one of those driving around here in Oklahoma City, and the guy's trying to sell it for like 10 grand, and I'm just like, nobody wants a Pontiac Fiero.
Oh, I'm like, damn, 10 grand for a Countach. You should just pull the trigger on that yesterday, bro.
Well, yeah, but no, this is a Pontiac Fiero dressed as a Countach. It's in drag.
Oh, I understand.
Yeah, it's horrible. It's a kit car, right? So ultimately, what Ralph is getting at here is Williams is struggling financially. I mean,
didn't they just sell off their engineering division too? To like they, yeah, I heard they had to sell it off, and then now they're using their old cars as collateral.
Yeah, I did hear something about that. I thought somebody came in and saved them, though. I may be wrong.
Was their
on
last
that.
name Latifi or Tictum?
I can't remember. I can't remember. I saw the article in passing, but basically, Ralph is urging them to adopt that model and stop constructing and stop manufacturing their own parts.
And I heard an interesting fact on that. Funny you should bring that up. I heard that this was some news report that came out on them. I think it was after the 2018 season. They were just basically like their system they had for managing their manufacturing, engineering, developing, testing, like all those like basic organizational systems. They were kind of built on a model that they hadn't updated. Like they weren't finding new ways to be more efficient, or maybe, hey, maybe we should try to do this differently. Let's try to save money here, because they had this culture of
Hmm.
bespokeness. It has to be in-house. It's going to be made by Williams for Williams. We are an engineering organization. We want to be true to that. And that went so far as to them not just buying the gearbox from Mercedes for the freaking engine. They were trying to make their own gearbox instead of just buying the one that Mercedes already makes made for their engine. Like that's literally reinventing a very expensive wheel. And I can definitely see where Ralph's coming from because that kind of decision making from any standpoint in any project, it's like if you can save so much time for your team to work on stuff that matters, like the chassis, the aerodynamics, integrating the power unit into the chassis, like stuff like that, and you can just have the gearbox fit and ready to go. Why would you waste the time? But that's who they are. They can't. They're so stubborn, and I guess that's very British. Like we're very set in our ways. We'll continue to do this because the way things always have been done. But you look at the dynamic nature of other teams like Mercedes, Red Bull. Like they adapt. Williams just doesn't want to adapt, just out of stubbornness, and now they've gone from being a top 3 constructor to scraping a 1 point in a wet race in the middle of the year.
How much do you think of that falls on Claire's shoulders?
Oh, that's always the age old question these days. Every time she comes on TV, oh, is Claire Williams going to fix Williams? Well, I don't know, man. I can't say she's wholly to blame because did you watch Drive to Survive this past season?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
So you saw the Patty Lowe drama, and that was a freaking mess. Like literally, what do you mean the car's not going to be ready? Like I couldn't believe what? A multi-million-dollar racing team, and that's the news hitting the boss's desk. I would fire everyone. Clean house. I'd be like, get the fuck out of here. What do you mean the car's not fucking ready? We've known about this the entire season. This isn't like a surprise, like, oh, testing got moved up.
The middle of last summer. What are you doing?
That's what I mean. Like, how did they manage to miss it so hard? And that obviously fell on Patty Lowe's shoulders. And when they brought him in, wasn't the whole thing like, it's Patty Lowe. It's the hero of the 90s. He had adaptive suspension. He's the reason why Senna left a McLaren, because he was getting his ass kicked by a Williams.
And I mean, he was at Mercedes.
Right. That too. He was with the Silver Arrow. So you think like, okay, great. And then that happens? What the fuck? I can't even begin to think of the dysfunction that had to go on for that to become an issue. I mean, I can't.
Why is that something that you figure out in the last week before testing, Why is it such a delayed thing? I mean, that's almost as gross of a negligence mistake as, Alonso showing up to IndyCar testing last year at Texas Motor Speedway and them not having a damn steering wheel for the car.
Yeah, it's like how does this shit happen? And I can tell you from some experience, you'd be surprised, but it does really rack the brain to think like this is their only job. They don't work on anything else. They're the Formula 1 team. It's not like they have like, oh yeah, like we got other projects going on around here. It's like, no, this is the one project, is getting the fucking car out and ready.
It's not like they work on road cars. It's not like anything like that. I mean, I have a day job. I do PPR for fun.
Yeah,
I don't
right.
sit here, could you imagine if I just completely...
We ask you, we show up once on a Tuesday night and talk for 40 minutes. You do it. It's not hard. And we should circle this back to Ralph's point. We don't really, I don't really know the financials off the top of my head, but Haas runs a shoestring budget that's slightly above Williams, right?
Oh, yeah.
So that goes to show that there already is a disparity because, yes, Haas is very low in the totem pole, just like Williams, but Haas has the culture already in place to be that team. They finished 5th in 2018, right? Like, they were punching way above their weight.
Yeah.
And it's not like if Williams is spending a couple million less and they're finishing 10th in the constructor standings, it's like there's maybe a larger organizational issue as a whole than just maybe we should start buying our parts. It's a culture thing, and they've already tried to change it. They're like, they want the fastest pit stops, and they want to do everything the most efficiently, and they got George Russell out there, like, busting his ass to get P19 every race.
He tries so hard.
He has to.
I mean, out of any driver, you know what? he would be an interesting driver to see take Vettel's seat, not trying to get that started back up again.
Too bad he's
But
going to be in a silver car.
uh, I mean, that's possible too. I I feel for George. I really do. I think Nicholas Latifi doesn't know what he's signed up for, other than the fact that
Well,
he's going to be in the most
Nicholas
prestigious
didn't really
sport in
sign
the
up for anything. He kind of just put the check down.
world. I mean, I guess if you have enough money, you can still buy your seat, much like they used to, right?
Well,
You know, I mean,
do you know Latifi's background?
no, I
Okay.
don't.
This is off topic, and we can cut this after the fact. But his dad owns the Canadian equivalent of Nestle, and has already tried to buy his way into other Formula One teams for his son. And that's not to say Nicholas is a bad guy. Like I don't know him. I can't say that. But he's already throwing around tens of millions of dollars like it's candy. So
So he's right there with
he's basically on par with Stroll. Like him and
Lawrence Stroll,
Stroll, they probably grew up like in the same neighborhood in fucking Montreal.
driving their little bicycles or pedal go karts. You remember those? They were driving pedal go karts around on the streets of Montreal.
I mean, it was probably more like, well, my dad owns this. Well, my dad owns this. I just assumed it was like a Canadian version of Gossip Girl.
I could definitely see that. But yeah, I totally agree. I think that Williams should start spending their money more wisely. You know, they're not innovating really anymore, are they? They're just doing enough to get by. And I think that that's a big struggle for them. I God, please innovate something to get rid of that god awful steering wheel setup.
Oh,
And
you don't like the old school screen on the dash and then the wheel in front?
I don't think anybody likes it. I don't even think the drivers like it. I
Well,
mean,
that's not entirely true. I've heard from I think they asked George in an interview once, and they're like, "Do you mind that?" And he's basically said like, "Well, don't you want your dash to be right side up when you're going through a corner?"
that's fair, and I get that. But also, if you're going through a long corner and you need to make an adjustment, you can't really do it.
I suppose
You
that's
can't
true.
see it. You can't see the menus
That
because
that
you and I both know there's tons of menus and settings inside of there. It's not all
which I
just
guess it goes back to your point of innovating. They're not really like just making the jump.
no. I mean, if they really want to innovate something like that and do it obscure or a different steering wheel setup, fine, do it. But figure out a better way for the driver to be able to see the wheel at all times or be able to see that at all times because that information is crucial. And that's why even in, the esports division, I always try to stay away from the Williams car because I want to be able to see that information at all times.
I feel that. I feel that. Well, then I guess the verdict is Williams. Yeah, become a customer.
Start buying stuff. I mean, you don't have to buy everything. I'm not saying that. Maybe buy 40% of your parts third party. And maybe it will save you some money. You know, that's what my suggestion would be. Um,
Let's wrap this up, huh? Final topic.
Final topic, guys. So this is, you are a big part of PPR here. So this is really a great question for you. Does the IndyCar esports event that happened this past week and the display that Simon Pagino put on with Lando Norris hurt esports in general? And before you answer that, I'm going to bring up the fact, we have seen other drivers in Formula One esports. For example, the very first or the second not Bahrain Grand Prix that was put on. We saw Johnny Herbert completely cut the first corner, and it was fine. But it's a question of how serious do these guys take it, and
So,
that's where the concern is.
and good. Okay, that's a great lead off. And do you know why Pagano said he did that?
Uh, I heard from what I've heard. I heard that Lando, or he said that he didn't want an F1 driver to win at
So,
Indy.
okay, so that I think that was more a rumor than it was the truth. The truth, I read this or I heard this. It was one of the two. Allegedly, there's an unwritten rule. Like, this is very American right here. This is the difference between American and European racing. At the Indy 500, there's an unwritten rule. If you're going 3 wide into a turn, because it's an oval, you're going at really high speed. Like, there's no really
Yeah.
braking zones. You're going into an oval. If you're 3 wide, if you're the last person in, even if you're alongside, it's your courtesy to back off so the front 2 cars can turn into that corner without worrying about an inside car drifting across and putting them in the barrier. Now, obviously, if you look at it from this perspective, in real life, that makes a lot of sense. I'm not going to argue against that. I'm not a race car driver. I'm just a fan, but no one wants to see anyone get hurt. I get it. Now, let's step back from that for a second. And this goes back to what we always say in the PPR office, basically. It's a video game. Like, that's it. This is a video game. We need to treat it like a video game. We want to cultivate a fun like a fun environment. And I know these guys are professionals, so it's a little different. But at the end of the day, there's no harm. There's no risk to yourself. Like, maybe you might hurt your wrist or your hands if the force feedback gets to you too much. But you're not. No one's gonna die in a sim race. You know what I mean? Like, so did they?
I totally agree.
So now, how does that tie into this? Them getting angry about a driver who's not an IndyCar driver not respecting an unwritten rule in a digital race, that's not okay, in my opinion. And I bet you'd agree with me, and I know you probably will, but even if you don't, it's fine. But if you look at the context they're trying to put it in, it's not really applicable to what was going on. And it's even a worse look when you think about this was something that was about to bridge the gap between the 2 sports.
Yeah.
I myself was like, oh shit, like I'm moving to Florida soon. I'm going to be right near St. Petersburg. I'm going to be able to go see that race when it happens. That's going to be really cool for me. I've never seen an IndyCar race.
Yeah.
Does this end up hurting the IndyCar brand? That, like, you already have an issue that there's an open wheel series here that exists and it's popular, and there's an open wheel series overseas that's popular. And then you have the guys here. Basically, it'd be like the equivalent of the United States men's national team, like pulling in a Dominican Sue and stomping on a Spanish player or a British player in an international friendly. People would lose their shit. They'd be like, oh, there go the fucking Americans again. And that's kind of what this looks like. It looks like they were throwing a tantrum because some 19-year-old kid from the UK who's raced in a couple of Grand Prix thought he'd come over and win on the first go. And apparently the Paginel was in cahoots with the other guy. What's his name? Was it Ferrucci or? He's got an Italian last name, but he's already got a bad reputation, from what I understand. Yeah. It seems to me that those two were. It's kind of one of those things like, well, if it walks like a duck and it talks like a duck, these guys were going to do the dumb thing no matter what, and their reputations will suffer as a result, and they have to deal with that. There won't be any repercussions for this because at the end of the day, it's still a video game. So.
I mean, the worst thing that's going to happen is he's going to lose some of his fan base. I was at the IndyCar race last year, and it was fantastic.
And Paginel won the 500 last year, correct?
He did. And I was there hoping Alonso would go, but obviously, McLaren can't set up.
We all saw what happened there at qualifying.
Yeah, McLaren can't set up a car. They set it up. They didn't convert something from metric to inches, and it screwed them. Like, that's literally what it was. If they would have adjusted the ride height or a spring or something, I can't remember exactly.
That is so funny. That is such.
But that's what it was.
God, that's the equivalent to you and a friend from another country going out to drink and saying, "How far is the bar?" And you say, "About a half a mile from here," and he just looks at you and goes, "Sure, okay. What the fuck is that?"
I mean, you're 100% right, because I have a friend in the UK, and if he came over here stateside, actually, I was talking to him. I drove down to Dallas this past weekend, and I was talking to him on the phone, and he was like, "How far is Dallas?" I was like, "Oh, it's about a 4-hour drive for me from Oklahoma City," and he was like, "God, America's big."
Yeah, exactly.
That would cover, a good part of the UK.
A 4-hour drive in the UK is coast to coast.
Oh,
maybe a little longer. I shouldn't say that, but it's if you look at compare the size of their island to the chunk of land we got over here, it's not even the same.
Oh yeah, but
so it was an inches to centimeters thing. Oh.
Yeah, it's metric to standard, and I just can't. I couldn't believe it. But Pagano did end up winning, and he, if you're a champion, an Indy 500 champion, that's unacceptable. I mean, this goes back to kind of like Vettel Hamilton and Baku, where Vettel is acting child. This is the same thing. I mean, I get that PPR for us, it is a video game. It is an esports division, and this is something that a lot of our drivers, in my opinion, take very seriously, especially Division One, whether it's PC or Xbox, and you know they take this very seriously, and they want to do the best, and they do try to be as realistic as possible. Waiting for the actual opportune moment on the track to get the pass done in a clean manner. And at the same point, though, if this is an unwritten rule, Lando Norris is a racing driver. He's a professional racing. You leave a gap for him, he's going to take it. If he feels that he has a run, he's going to take it.
Yeah, he's not gonna consider the unwritten rules.
He's not going to consider anything, and
but that's just racing too. Like that's the nature of this sport. Like you got the chance to overtake, you're probably going to want to overtake.
And I mean, let's be real here, right? I'm going to be 100% honest. I think that if it was real life, Lando Norris would have done the same exact move.
You think? I mean, it seemed to me that he was. I saw the incident replayed. It didn't really look like he caused any problems. I just think he drifted over, and the other guy overcorrected for that, and he sent someone into the barrier. But I didn't. I'm not a steward. I couldn't tell you, dude. But it didn't look like Lando had any malintent. And then for them to go on stream and go, "Oh, I'm going to put him in the barrier now." It's like, "Oh, come on, man! Like, don't do that."
Right.
Don't do that.
So, I mean, that's different. We do that on.
I mean, that's some bush league fucking
Thursdays when we're not taking it seriously.
That's like some bush league unranked lobby F1 2019 shit.
Yeah.
Like you're in a party with your buddy. Hey, he took me out on the last lap. You take him out.
It is Forza, 100%.
Oh god, yeah. Forza.
So, here's my real question. Obviously, it's hurting Pagano's reputation on some level, but what do you think it's doing for esports? Do you think it's, making people think, oh, these guys aren't taking this seriously? Do you think it's hurting our reputation as an esports?
Because these guys aren't esports drivers. They're not. They're real life race car drivers. This is not something they do regularly. Even maybe it is, maybe it isn't. But we do this because this is as close as we get to the real thing. They get to have the real thing. They're never ever going to see this the same way we see it, and that's fine. They shouldn't. If I was a real life race car driver, I would think video games are ridiculous. I'd be like, why would I do that? I already do that in my real life. And obviously everyone's different. Like look at a guy like Verstappen. It's all he does in his spare time. I don't think he even like sees his girlfriend. He just texts her in between iRaces, and that's probably fine for him. That's what he likes in his spare time. But for a lot of these guys, this is very uncharted territory. Like you heard about what happened when a lot of the F1 guys were having to get rigs flown in at the very last minute for the not the GP stuff.
Yep.
Fucking Stoffel Van Dorn was using a Logitech attached to his desk. Like,
don't make fun of Logitech.
I'm not. I'm just. Do you see what I mean? Like, this isn't something they didn't. It's not even occurred to them. Like, to us, this is as real as it's ever gonna get. I'm probably never gonna drive a Formula One car unless I hit the lottery. That's just a fact. I've made peace with that. But that's why it doesn't hurt it, because this isn't what it usually is. If you look at guys like Daniel Beresne and who's the kid, Brandon Leon, like the Mercedes esports team, these kids are fucking fast. And they treat each other with respect on the track from what I can see. I've watched a couple of the esports tournaments. They're cool. But that's as real as it's going to get for them too. They have to treat it that way. They're going to treat it that way. I treat it that way. I race in the lowest division with all assists turned on for the most part. But I still feel the adrenaline. I still feel the thrill of an overtake or the thrill of a close battle, like going into a tight hairpin. Like that means something to me. But that again, this is as real as it's ever going to get.
I think that's an excellent note to end on. This is as real as it's going to get, guys. Esports is a fantastic, gift that we are in an amazing time and era to be able to play on the internet. I remember a time when I couldn't play online, and again, drivers in much older F1 games, and it, we do it for the rush. We do it for the idea of the adrenaline and for the idea of the glory that esports does provide. So I think esports will carry on no matter what, um, and that we will obviously thrive uh, in this pandemic time as it's brought more light to what we do have. I want to thank you guys so much for taking the time to listen to this podcast and listen to my banner along with Best. Thank you so much. Please feel free to stop by our YouTube channel, PPR Esports, and please stop by the website as well. That is ppresports.com. Thank you so much, guys. As always, this is IB.
Later. See ya.
Best. Any final words?
Nah, I'm good.
All
good
right.
good shit, man.
You
That was
guys have a
fun.
wonderful rest of your day. Thank you so much for stopping by.